Today I'm going to be painting in the style of Van Gogh. Hi everyone, Steve Elliott here again. I want to begin by having a real close look at this painting. This is called the Cypress. And look at the brushwork. The paint is so thick. So my natural instinct here was to choose Artrage and use the thick oil paint brushes to try and see if I could emulate that thick paint. You'll have to stay with me until the end of the video to see how I get on. So I begin by sampling a palette as always. I crack on a ground colour and then I stop. I felt out my depth straight away with this. It didn't come easy because it's so different to how I paint. So I began by sort of sketching out these narrow boats on my reference sketch. And I'm working on the iPad, and I had a very small resolution really. I set the screen to 2048 pixels by 1536, so it's quite small. And I sketched out these rough sort of shapes, and if you've seen me paint before, you'll know this is sort of not quite how I normally start. But because I did feel nervous and threatened and out of my comfort zone, which is exactly what I want to achieve doing this painting in the style of series. Anyway, I want to say first of all, thank you everybody that gave a suggestion. I've got 39 different artists to go at, including Bob Ross, which I thought was fantastic. Although I guess there's lots of people done paintings like Bob Ross. But I want to thank Bobby Lee and Anna Canoli, I hope I've pronounced that right, for suggesting Van Gogh or Van Gogh, depending how you pronounce it, as one of the artists that they would like to see me paint in the style of. So this is it. Here we go. I have to begin by saying Van Gogh was really famous for his distinctive brushwork. And when I looked at the close-up of the painting, it really is very thick paint. And in places, he looks like he's turned the brush round and scraped into it with the handle of the brush and all sorts of things. So I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to paint that digitally or reproduce that digitally. Certainly with Artrage, I don't know if Corel Painter has tools that can emulate that, but I don't think I'm going to get it in Artrage, but I'm going to have a go. So, what do we know about Van Gogh? He was born in 1853 and died in 1890. And he only painted really in the last 10 years of his life. And he painted, believe it or not, 2,100 pieces. They weren't all paintings. He did, I think, about 860 oil paintings. But he did 2,100 pieces of work in a 10-year period. And most of that was in the last 2 years of his life. That is absolute madness. In fact, he was considered to be mad. I guess he wasn't really. He did suffer from depression. He spent, I think, the last year of his life in an asylum. And I used to work in one of those places as a painter and decorator many years ago. And they're not cool places. I think they've all been shut down now. Anyway, that's besides the point. And he painted this particular painting called Cypress just after he'd entered the asylum. So I guess it was in the last year of his life. And what can I say about that except it is a stunning piece of work. And what amazed me, I think, about Van Gogh was the actual detail that he put into his paintings without necessarily trying to capture the detail of the real world. His brushwork is absolutely intricate, way more so than I thought it was going to be when I started this. And I did start it on the iPad, but once I'd finished, or I thought I'd finished it on the iPad and transferred it to my PC, I thought, no, this is just not, it's not even close. So I ran a script on it in Artrage. I put it into the Artrage 5 and ran a script on it, and upscaled it 3 times. So I then had a pixel size of 6144 by 4608, so I could go into it and put in a lot more detail. So I'm still working on the iPad at this point, and I did have a lot of fun with it. I really enjoyed painting this. Well, I always pretty much enjoyed painting everything I paint, to be honest, but it was really nice getting out of my comfort zone, wondering how I was going to approach it, sort of changing my technique as I was going, and using greens. I put in a comment the other day that I don't use greens very often in my paintings. It's not a colour that I lean towards and not very comfy with. Well, I haven't got a lot of choice with this because, you know, I sampled Van Gogh's palette and there's lots of greens in there. So I was surprised, in actual fact, how easy I found it using the greens once I'd got a decent palette to work with. And I really enjoyed that, which surprised me because I pretty much avoid greens like the plague, and I'm using blues and yellows and purples, really. The subject I chose for this, I didn't want to just pick a sort of a tree in a field and do a copy of Van Gogh's painting. I wanted to paint in the style of, but choose a subject which clearly was different to what Van Gogh had painted. So I guess I've got the trees in there, I've got the distant trees in the sky, and the foreground was great because that allowed me to pretty much try and copy what he'd done in his painting. But the narrowboats sort of make it my piece, I guess. And I am painting in the style of, but I did keep finding myself sort of forgetting and then sort of just painting I normally would, and then have to rethink what I was doing and go back into it. So I'm still on the iPad, and on the iPad, I have to say it did look great, but when I enlarged it on the PC, I thought, I can't put this on any social media. It doesn't look finished. It looks like sort of I'd started it and give up. So Van Gogh, he actually died broke and considered to be a failure and mad and a failed painter in his lifetime. I mean, there were stories of him that he cut off part of his left ear with a razor after having an argument with Gogh, and he did shoot himself. He died of suicide when he shot himself in the chest, and he was only 37 years old. So it was considered to be a failure at that time, and it wasn't till after that he became really famous and sort of really inspired the modern art movement, really, as we know it today. So much to be admired about him, really, even though he had a really sad life, which I guess is sort of the romantic image people like to think of painters, that they sort of live their life in turmoil and torment to produce these fantastic works of art, which is kind of a bit romantic, I suppose. But anyway, let's get back to the painting. I did notice that he's got these lovely swirls going off, but also he's put like little strokes of colour. You can see it particularly in the sky. I've just done that there. It just puts these little strokes of colour that follow the contours of the swirling shapes he's made. So I noticed that sort of later on, and I sort of try to put that in there a little bit and capture that. That was something that I'd never noticed before, because to be honest, I think everybody's seen a Van Gogh and would recognise one, and I certainly would, but I've never taken the time to have a close-up look to really study the painting and see how the brush strokes work. So I decided that I needed to go a little bit darker in places. I felt that it was looking a little bit flat. There's no room for sort of adding glazes to this painting like I did with the Rembrandt one I did at the end, when I sort of put a glaze over the whole thing to change the tone. It's just not that style. You have to paint every stroke, I think, with this. So I'm sort of going in, putting shadows behind the leaves, continually looking at the reference. You notice I've got the reference more visible than the reference of the Van Gogh, more visible than the reference of the scene, because I'd got the scene in and I was more concentrated trying to paint in the style of Van Gogh than I was now to capture the scene. So I'm just sort of darkening up the shadows, and it's getting to the point now where I was thinking it was finished, and I was quite happy with it. So I saved the file and I uploaded it onto my PC, and it just did not look finished at all. It looked like I'd drawn it on a really low res setting, which I had really. So I then put it into Artrage on the PC and spent a lot of time putting a lot more detail into it, looked at the finished painting, and I thought, this looks nothing like Van Gogh at all. I'm going to have to think of something else. So I took it back into Artrage on the iPad, and I used the tube of paint. As you can see, I'm like layering on lots of thick paint, and it looks a bit like plasticine. I don't know if you're old enough to remember plasticine. As a kid, I used to love messing about with it, and I used to make little sculptures and things. So I guess that was like an art crafting thing that I got into. Anyway, so I was putting all this plasticine on the painting, and looking at the original piece, the sky, he did use different techniques. His skies were really big, thick brush strokes and laid on really thick. And his trees, they were much more delicate and fine lines. I don't know if I've said it already, but the amount of detail that he put into a painting was phenomenal. I didn't realise how much detail was in there, and it took me a lot longer to do this than I thought it was going to do. This layering on the paint again, what I did, I just used the colour selector to select the colour I was going, lay on the tubes, and then use the palette knife. I think it was just the sort of normal smudge one, just to soften those colours up. And it was a little bit like, it's as close as I could get to his brushwork style. So, I mean, it's not exact, it's not brilliant, but I don't suppose it's too bad. I don't know. Anyway, it was quite a tedious thing, because I wasn't necessarily being creative while I was doing this. I was just layering the colour over the top of the original painting and then adding texture to it with the palette knife, and then using the thick oil brush to add a little bit more colour. At that point it became creative again. Once I'd sort of got the initial thick strokes in, then started to paint back into it again. And seeing the original painting that I'd done on the larger screen of the PC, I knew which areas needed to be worked on, and that was the narrow boats. They look really sort of quite crude. Well, really crude, because they still look crude when the painting's finished. And I'd got sort of 3 different styles of trees. The ones to the right are the ones that I kind of stuck to is trees in his or the source demo, what am I calling it? The painting, the original painting. Sorry, I'm getting all mixed up here. And the original painting, and then the other 2 I kind of went into his swirly thing, and then the big willow tree, I had to kind of get the impression that these leaves were hanging over. So it was kind of a mixture between the 2, really. I really like doing the tree on the right. The tree on the left with all the swirls in it. And then I went back into the sky, as you can see, and darkened up the colour. And I kind of copied this swirly thing in the water. I really liked the effect I've got there. So I'm thinking this is way more like the Van Gogh than the first painting I did that I scrapped. So it did take me a long time, and I will let you decide if you think I've achieved it or not. I hope you like this. I hope you found it useful and informative. If you have, a big thumbs up as always would be much appreciated. And if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. I have lots of videos all about digital painting, and I would love to be sharing those with you. So hopefully I will see you in the next one. Bye.